everybody. So today on our interview podcast, we have Dr. Luke Hubley. Luke completed his undergraduate degree first starting at Sam Houston State and then finishing up at Texas State. He then completed his Master of Music as well as his DMA at the University of Houston. He is currently on faculty at San Jacinto College, where he was previously at Houston Community College, and maintains a pretty active private lesson studio. So, Luke, welcome to our podcast episode today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, man. So one of the first questions I'm kind of asking everybody that I've just been interviewing this week is, with all the stuff that's been happening with COVID-19 and just honestly, even in the stuff in the news recently, like the world is just going absolutely crazy right now. So describe a normal day for you before all this stuff started happening. Like what kind of work were you doing?
So normally, back in February or so, before all this really started happening, I would typically I start teaching kind of mid-morning. Depends on the day, but I'll usually drop my son off to school, and then I'll come home and either go to the gym real quick or get some practice in at home for a little while, and then I usually go teach. Um, and then when I'm done teaching for the day, typically I'm picking my son up. I'm having dinner and homework time with my son, and then I'm usually off to either rehearsal or performance sometime that night. Most weeks I'm doing a rehearsal or performance probably 4 to 6 nights a week.
So I've got a couple questions within that. So one is like, what age level of students do you normally work with?
I generally work from sixth grade through high school, and then I also teach college age students.
So you really see like the full spectrum. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what are some of the challenges or advantages of being able to see, that whole spectrum of student, and like kind of talk a little bit about how it's different or similar from a total beginner to, let's say, someone who's in college?
It there's more similarities, I think, than there are differences. I With sixth graders, especially once they've kind of got a hang of things, once they've got past the point of like grip, and we're really just studying like the basics of technique. You know, with newer students at all age levels, you're going to start off with like the stroke, right? You're going to break down the stroke anyway. Um, so we do a lot of the same stuff over, through all my age group, just to ensure that they've got control of the stroke types and that there's no mechanical issues happening, right? So we,
That's stuff that really never goes away.
no,
You're kind of revisiting that throughout your career.
yeah, and I mean, I revisit myself all the time, making sure there's nothing weird happening, or like now I'm videoing myself more than I ever do, and I'm noticing, hey, there's some weird things happening in my left hand that I wasn't aware of.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it's healthy to always look back on that. Um, and then the other thing that I like a lot with my younger students, because it's so hard to do this with older students, is working on reading, because they're not like, they don't understand yet that reading is a problem. They don't understand yet that for a lot of people there's no negative like association with reading. Like, I
Right.
don't know about you, but my background with reading pitch percussion developed very late. So I was never a confident or competent reader on pitched instruments for a long time. And I see it in so many of my students. I see the lack of fluency, and I see like very clearly like, oh, there's a reason why you don't know how to read, and then you couple that with like all these negative feelings that you've attached to it, and now they'll prevent you from doing the work. So I kind of like it with the young kids because they don't have that. So I can just say, do exactly these things, and then we'll get incremental progress with it. So I
That's
like that.
Yeah.
It's a struggle to do that with the older kids.
I feel like one of the challenges I had to face whenever I was teaching like all my beginners was how to make mallets cool. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? And so like one of the things that we would do that I learned from another friend of mine was I would always try to bring in stuff like Star Wars themes or something, or like Super Mario Brothers, just something that like
sure.
they could grasp onto, because if you're trying to teach them all cows eat grass, or
Yeah,
FACE, it's like that's like watching paint dry on the wall for them. And so it's like, hey, today we're going to learn the intro theme to Star Wars, and guess what, this is also in the key of B flat, which we've been talking about this week. Just things like that. And I feel like that
yeah,
really gets them inside, really gets them like stoked. And then also you can also change that to different keys, so you can say this is still the same Star Wars piece, but today we're going to learn it in the key of F. You know what I mean? What's different about the key
right.
of F? And just things like that to kind of just to kind of get more mileage out of the same piece. That's really cool. Can you talk a little bit
You know,
about how the
it's interesting
COVID?
that you
Go
say
ahead.
that
Yeah.
because certainly when I was growing up, like I grew up in rural Texas
Sure.
in the 80s, and at that time, like it sounds so backwards to say, but this really wasn't my experience. For the most part, mallets were for girls,
Sure.
and boys
Yeah.
didn't really play. It's so backwards to think,
Yeah.
but that's really what my experience was. And it's not that, like I was always kind of drawn to it a little bit, but still, like I wasn't assigned those parts, and it was frustrating for me to learn them anyway. So
Mhm.
it was easy to avoid back then.
Sure.
Um, so definitely trying to like make them cool is a big thing. But then once I got exposed to it later in life, it was very easy for me to see how interesting and fascinating these instruments are. Um, but it's what's interesting now, at least in the districts that I'm teaching in, I don't I don't face that particular struggle anymore. All the kids are expected to do it, and most of them seem to like it.
Hmm.
It's just the reading is such a wall for them usually.
So like what are some of the tools that you use for reading? Because I like this past year, a lot of my colleagues had recommended that game Staff Wars, and so we use that for like pitch reading and stuff, and it's like that's been super helpful because it's like flashcards for them, and they're able just to get it super quickly. So like, what are some other things that you've been using that you have
I
found
don't know
success?
about Staff Wars, but there's so many of those like apps for like Note ID. Um, like Tenuto, which is that one that Music Theory Net does.
Mm-hmm.
That one has like you can identify the notes in the staff, but you can also identify like on a keyboard layout. So that's kind of cool. So there's lots of those, and I always try to just say, hey man, whatever games you play on your phone, keep playing them. I'm not trying to limit
Yeah.
your phone time or anything, but just name 20 notes first. It doesn't take long at all. Or when you're stuck waiting in line somewhere, or when mom picks you up from school and you got 20 minutes in the car, nothing to do, like just name 50 notes or something. It's pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
Uh, so I encourage that. But then honestly, with reading, the system that I'm really trying to get my kids to do is go back to stepwise motion,
Mm-hmm.
only stepwise motion, and only very simple rhythms, and learn like one page of music a day. And in my mind, this should be like, every week should be 7 or 10 more solos. It usually ends up taking longer than that, but that's what I do. I'm going back to like stepwise motion, simple rhythms, and then very, very gradually increase the rhythmic complexity until the kids reach some amount of fluency. I think that's the problem. They don't ever reach fluency. Like a lot of the books that sixth grade percussion teachers use introduce things like one note a week or something, and I don't personally think that's the best way to teach it. I
Yeah.
don't think anybody actually learns notes at that rate of speed on these instruments. On other instruments, sure, because there's other things to deal with. But on these, it's like you learn the layout and then and they're not hard to access, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think limiting the range and doing only stepwise motion helps us achieve fluency over a gradual period of time, and then it will come back after a certain number of time, weeks or months maybe, and then we'll go into thirds and kind of repeat the process. Um, so yeah, that's the approach that we're using. And at first, I was using. Are you familiar with Sight Reading Factory?
I am not, but I will look it up as soon as I get done with this.
It's really cool because what you can do, it's just an app. It's like $30 a year for the app,
Mm.
but you go in and you can say, okay, I want only stepwise motion, only within the staff, and only with these kind of rhythms. And you hit a button and it'll give you a piece of music. And
Mm.
then when you're done, you can hit another button and a brand new piece of music with the same rules. Or if you want to transpose it, it'll do that. Like it just writes the music for you. So for the
Yeah.
first several weeks worth of material, I was using those. Now I'm trying to take the time to actually write out my own etudes for them, so I can be a little bit more controlling. But it's great. Like I use it in my own practice.
Man, that's super awesome. Like I feel like there's going to be all these new apps that just come out and just really help us teach music at a better level. That's so cool. So the next question I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you was, how has the COVID pandemic affected you and your work? Because I know that you're a freelance worker, and can you describe some of the freelance work that you were doing and how that just stopped, and like what you're doing
Sure.
now?
Yeah, I mean, in a given year, I typically do either doing a whole run of a show or subbing in for a certain number of shows. I generally have been doing 12 or 13 music theater productions a year. And then I do a fair amount of sub work at church jobs, occasional casual like jazz things. I don't really do any club gigs. And then there's a fair amount of chamber music that I still do, uh, and a little bit of orchestral stuff. Not as much orchestral stuff in the past few years. And that for me is a big variety of drum set as well as general percussion. Like this last year seemed to be much more general percussion. Last summer we did a run of West Side Story. I was playing the percussion book for that, so that was like 5 or 6 weeks of doing, that percussion book. But yeah, it's a nice mix of stuff that I generally do.
Very cool. Very
Again, that was in pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it's none of that. None of those things are happening.
So you just had
Uh,
this moment like, oh my gosh, like what now? And like that's kind of what I've been talking with everybody about was like describe that oh crap moment that like happened.
I was on a run of a show, a new production. I was playing this kind of drum set percussion book for. Um, it's a brand new show. It's called Lady of Agreda. We were about to start our second. Actually, we were in our opening week. We had done the previews and everything. We were kind of opening. We opened up on I think Friday or Wednesday, one of those days, and then we closed on Sunday. And that was supposed to be a 3 or 4 week run, and we closed up. Um, that's the last real run. I mean, I've subbed in for a church job once in May, um, but that's really been it. We finished that on that Sunday, and then we moved out. Optimistically, they say we're coming back in August, but no one really knows right now.
Mhm.
So yeah, all the performance work is gone, and it's just sort of guesswork is when that stuff's going to come back. I do think it will come back.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think it's going to come back all at once, of course. I think, especially for me, not being attached to any particular organization,
Sure.
I expect for it to come back slowly. So I'm kind of, I have to wait for other people to feel ready to come back, and then of course all the funding for all those organizations. I imagine it'll be quite a while. I think it'll be a quiet year.
Yeah. So have you just kind of shifted your focus just to teaching online now, or like are you teaching online? Could you talk a little bit
I'm
about
teaching
that?
only online right now. The kind of the good thing about this, as far as when all this is happening, is it happened middle of the spring semester, so things were already kind of starting to wind down. March. I don't know if you teach in-school lessons, but March in Texas public school lessons, that's like a terrible month because there's all the testing and then there's spring
Yeah.
break. So you lose a bunch of lessons, and then April comes back and it's a good month. And then you lose a lot in May as well because of testing, and that's kind of the end of the year. So I always feel like March starts to wind down the year. So I was winding down, where I was teaching around 30, 35 students a week. Um, Before all this, now I'm doing just online lessons, and it's a much smaller number. It's not quite half that.
Hmm.
Uh, but I'll try to maintain those through the summer, and then in the fall, maybe we'll be back in school, maybe we'll be continuing online. But yeah, I set myself up to teach online pretty quickly once it started going, and started reaching out to students, and a good amount of them wanted to continue online. Some of them weren't really set up for it.
Hmm.
Some of them weren't as interested. Or there's loss of income in the house, so maybe they didn't want to do that, which is you know completely understandable.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I've shifted mostly to online teaching. Even at
So
the college, we finished the semester online.
Could you talk a little bit about like some of the tech stuff that you had to get together? Like, did you invest in like cameras or microphones or anything like that?
I am really trying hard not to spend any money
I hear you on
on
that.
any music things right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems dicey to be spending money on any performance related stuff at the moment.
Hmm.
I'm fortunate in a lot of ways, but one of the things I'm really fortunate in is that as a freelancer, I've had to really collect a bunch of instruments over time.
Hmm.
So I have I have access to gear in my home. I don't have to leave the home. I've got everything right here. And I already had an interface and computer and mics and everything. So um, I was already really set up.
To
The
do
only
it
thing I
anyways.
wasn't,
Hmm.
yeah, I didn't have. I had this kind of home studio, and I don't really have Wi-Fi in here, so I had to come up with a solution for that, which at the moment is 100 foot long Ethernet cable that stretches from our garage studio to the inside of our house, and it's like taped across the living room floor. Eventually we'll be able to get an electrician out here, but for now, that's what it is.
You gotta do what
Uh,
you gotta do.
yeah, that's right. So that works, and then it would be better to get some mics, but I'm just relying on the mics from the laptop. And sometimes with Zoom, you can just kind of call into your own meeting on another device.
Hmm.
So like for drum set lessons, sometimes I'll have multiple cameras just through multiple devices.
Sure.
But that's what I did. So I have this Steinberg 8 channel interface.
Hmm.
Um, and I have this mic that I use for my talking mic, and then I always keep it next to the keyboard, so easily go in right here. But then, yeah, the drum set is all close mic'd. Everything is within within reach here.
Yeah, that's been kind of one of my goals of this. I mean, even before the COVID stuff started happening, was just to kind of get my little home studio set up so I could teach lessons from home if I needed to, or give lectures or whatever. And I think I'm finally coming to that place. But one of
The
the other
gear is such a problem for percussionists, right?
dude, and that's like yeah, and that's like a whole thing that I've been talking with folks about is that like what realistic expectations can we have for students moving forward to have their own instruments and the development of the mallet station and all these or like the mallet cat and stuff like that. It's like what should students have in order to be able to practice at home and the access to gear and all that, which sort of leads into like some of my next questions, which are like one of the main problems that percussionists all over are facing is the dependency on community instruments. So what
Yeah.
are like what do you think your response is to that, and like how can we find a solution to, you know, I know that some programs are able to just let students borrow instruments. Like, you know, in my case, I was able to let my one of my students like take the marimba from the school, and I
hmm
know that that's not the option for everybody. But talk a little bit about that and your own experience with your students.
Man, okay, so that's a huge issue for percussionists. Not just students, even like working professionals don't always have access to everything they need. Um, so yeah, it's a huge issue. I think from sixth grade, from the school standpoint, the best solution, this is my favorite solution I've seen so far, is that the school either requires that the students rent. Well, actually, that's my second favorite. I don't think they should have to require to rent because that's a barrier for some families, right?
Right, right.
So some schools, what they'll do is the school will buy a set of these like practice xylophones, like Marimba Warehouse, actually Yamaha, all the Majestic, all the companies are making these now. These like 3 octave, no
Practice
resonator.
marimbas or whatever.
It's on the accent. Yeah, yeah. They kind of sound, okay, but they are wood bars, and some of them have full size bars. I know Majestic has a full size bar, but it's only like 3.3 octaves. And they're like Paduk bars, but at least they're the right size and you get the sound. So my favorite solution is that the school buys a set of these, and then the school can then rent them out to the students.
I would agree with
Or
that. I would agree with that way better, just because that way the school has that asset already. Like
yeah,
they're not having to rent it from a business that might go out of business. You know what I mean? It's like they
yeah,
got
the
their own
business
thing
could go out
going.
of business. The business could be way overcharging, which
Yes.
oftentimes happens.
Mhm.
Or another thing is when families don't have access to, the extra $60 a month to rent that, maybe they can work out a scholarship and charge that one student less or nothing at all or whatever.
Mhm.
There's options if the school buys them, and then they can always, even if a school can't afford to buy a whole set of these, maybe they can buy a certain number and then have the other kids rent from a company. I like that option. My preference is that they use some sort of wood bar instrument at home.
Mhm.
And again, the school, another positive of the school owned set of instruments is that they can say, this is what you need for sixth grade. Come seventh grade, we recommend you go to a marimba size instrument instead of these xylo bars. They can maybe encourage them to do that. Because I do see a lot of families buy these, and they're great for sixth grade through maybe seventh grade, maybe even eighth grade. But how useful are they really in ninth grade? They're really hard to get any formality work out of them.
Hmm.
And I find that most high school students are not particularly focused on xylophone playing, so they're not getting as much use out of it.
For
Yeah,
sure.
which is kind of
Um,
a shame because their two mallet chops need more attention.
yeah, and so it's just trying to find the solution. You know what I mean? Because it's we're making big leaps and bounds from these like garbage like bell kits. You know what I mean? Where to me
Yeah,
it's such an outdated way of teaching this, and then it's like even as far as like 2019 2020, it's literally apples and oranges. You know what I mean? And I even like I'm actually making some lectures right now for a couple classes that I'm teaching, and in the lectures I keep talking about, okay, if we're gonna make these beginners buy the bell kits, like we got to ask ourselves, like, what are we trying to teach with this? And like if we're trying to get to this end result, which is like a marimba or a vibraphone or a xylophone, this metallic instrument is like nowhere close to that. So like how are
it's
we supposed
literally
to
only
teach
good for the layout. Like you can understand the layout, and you can start to like, I guess, map the note to like the action of like associating the written note with something that you're gonna play. But like, there's no you can't learn keyboard technique on those instruments. You just can't.
Yeah, it's like really tough.
Yeah.
One of the like moving forward from this, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was like your extensive musical theater experience. So could you talk a little bit about getting into that scene? And I know, and to be honest, so there's actually been quite a few people that have reached out to even me, and they've asked me like, how did you get into this? And should I go to college for musical theater? And I'm like, no, you should just focus on being a good percussionist. Like to me, that's the answer. Like never in a million years did I think I would get calls for stuff like that or even want to get calls for stuff like that. I was like, my priority was just being a well-rounded musician first, and then
Yeah.
whatever work came, I would have the freedom to be able to accept work, take on that work or give it to somebody else. So talk about that of like what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, for me, I had a similar experience in that, like, I just wanted to play. I was fascinated by the idea that I might potentially be able to have some sort of reasonable income through music. Like, that's been my second music dream. My first dream, of course, when you're a kid, is like, well, I want to be on that giant stage and make all the millions of dollars and tour the world.
Yep.
Once reality set in and I noticed that wasn't happening for me, I was like, well, but I still want to, like, music is the only thing, like, job wise that I've ever been remotely interested in. So how can I play and earn some kind of respectable income
So you
and be able
mean
to
you're not
support
driving around listening to musicals in your car 24/7?
I am not. I have a lot of friends that are, but I
I know,
personally,
yeah.
yes,
I'm not laughing at those people, but like I have so many friends that are percussionists that are like, I want to get into this business so bad, and I listen to musicals in my car all the time, and I can't wait to get in there. And it's like, well, you just got to focus on being a awesome musician first.
yeah,
So if you're a percussionist that has never studied drum set, get your butt in the practice room and get in there. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like listen to some records, be able to play music on the instrument. Don't worry about the musical just yet.
It's such a big deal with drum set too. Is a lot of classical guys that didn't grow up playing drum set. A lot of them also didn't seem to grow up listening to drum set based music,
Yeah.
or if they did, a lot of them didn't focus on what the drummer does in that stuff. So when you hear them try to play even like a basic rock groove, it can be really awkward. Like the groove is just not comfortable.
It's
So
like
a
pretty
big part of
square,
that
right?
is,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it can be. I've known a few people that made that transition really well, um, but a big part of that driving around should be like listening to music. Like if you want to play, Hamilton, or have you listened to hip hop? Like you probably
Yeah.
need to know those styles. Like, and you can't just like listen to Hamilton as your source for the style.
Yeah.
That particular, you know, my son loves that show, so it's been on at the house like constantly during all this. Um, and honestly, I didn't really listen to it before, but
Hmm.
listening to it because, like I said, it's on all the time here. Um, that that book is definitely referencing like Destiny's Child. He's referencing Biggie. He's referencing, so much '90s hip hop in there and
And
R&B.
if you have no context of that at all, and you get that book, like you're in trouble. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's true for so many books. If you're playing, if you're playing,
Like recently, I did Dreamgirls, and that's just like super like that was probably the most fun book I have like ever played in my life because it was I wouldn't like it is a musical, yes, but it's like it was such a well written part where I felt like I could, as soon as I could harness like the power of the 70s, you know what I
yeah,
mean? It's like I could
yeah.
just feel let loose, and then I got so many compliments from pretty much all the musicians. They were like, "Dude, you've got this style like down. It sounds so funky and it's awesome."
Even if you're playing something like Little Shop's a really fun show, and it's not particularly hard, but
Mhm.
it's definitely all about the style, right? You've got to know.
Right.
And, I did Crybaby a few years ago. Do you know that one?
I don't like. And again, I'm not a super huge like musical theater person, but like I'm getting a lot
I
of
didn't
directors reaching out to have me play with them. But
That's great. I'm kind of the same way. I didn't know most books I don't know unless I played them. There's a few exceptions like Hamilton, but most of these I don't know unless I've happened to play them.
yeah,
But I did Crybaby a few years ago, and that's based on a lot of like '50s early rock and roll stuff. And that one doesn't sound hard, but man, that was a hard show, and all because of the style. There's so like you know, I listened to a bunch of that stuff a long time ago, but I don't like listen. I don't find myself listening to '50s era rock all the time.
because drums are
But if you
tuned a
go back,
certain way too, and it's like it's got a certain sound and like that whole philosophy as well. Like the last time I went to go see a drummer play, not to mention any names, it was like Bull in a China shop, and I'm like, do you know when this book was written? This book was written not at a time where they had drums sounding like that. It's like
yeah,
you got to think about the tuning of your instrument. You got to think about the touch. Like you're only playing an ensemble of 5 people, so the volume on the drums probably shouldn't be that loud. You know what I mean?
yeah, and it wasn't in the '50s. They weren't doing rim shots on every backbeat.
And having bass drums like that big size with low tuning, like doom. It's like no. The 50s didn't sound like that. You're not listening. You know?
Yeah, but they also, and what I was gonna say made that show so hard for me is it's almost like they were playing straight time on one hand with a little bit of swing in the other hand, and like that level of gray area is really
Yeah.
hard to get into it. And I think it's really easy to overlook that they were doing that in the '50s.
It's the days before lining up with click tracks and quantizing.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
go
like
back
the
to
groove.
those Elvis tunes, and it's like it's not straight, but it's also not swung. What's happening here? It's kind of in the cracks, and that kind of playing is hard if you don't do it all the time.
So this kind of ties into another question. It's like, how do you do research for these shows? Because I feel like that's a whole process in itself. Of like, as soon as you get the book, it's like, okay, I'm not a huge musical theater person, but I got this gig, and I'm a good enough musician to where I can get it. So who do I need to listen to, or what source recordings, and like talk about your process.
So for me, what I will generally do is the first question is I need the book if or at least an instrument list because some of these books have giant instrument lists, like especially the
Mhm.
percussion books. So you got to find that out. As soon as I get the book, I want to listen to the first cast recording and then whatever other cast recordings are available. Some of these shows have multiple recordings. Oftentimes, there's only one or two. So listen to the recording, and then other questions that come into play are if there's multiple recordings, does the director have a recording that they prefer? Um,
That's actually really important, like especially for a couple of the shows that I've been working with. Like the director has specifically said, "This is the recording that we're going off of," and that's just been super helpful.
it's especially true in like I don't know about you, but I do a lot. I'm in the Houston area, and there's a lot of like high school shows, and these high schools will like hire a pro orchestra, but they are only hiring the orchestra for like two rehearsals, maybe three rehearsals, and then you're doing the shows. So for all that rehearsal time, they're oftentimes using a recording, right?
Mm,
The kids will get very familiar with the particular recording of
right.
"Hello Dolly" or whatever. So it is really helpful to know because that can give you style, but it can also give you tempo information, um, And also, some books you can see what's on the page is drastically different from certain recordings because
Yeah.
they're different books.
That's how it was with Dreamgirls, because when you look at the book, it's all handwritten. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? And it's all super old. And like I asked the MD, I was like, I noticed that in recording there wasn't some, it's not the same stuff. He's like, oh yeah, people have been messing around with this like since the '70s. You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
just it has evolved over time, and there's some stuff, and I've just had to make changes. Right? If I have to write my own part, then I will. That's another topic right there. Is like being able to, you know, not like rearrange stuff, but like being able to condense information down to like a cheat sheet if you need to, or if you need
yeah.
to rewrite a part if it's like kind of goofy and like looks is maybe notated a little bit differently.
Yeah. Do you have to do that pretty often?
I've only had to do that. Usually that's when I have to combine books. That's usually
Yes.
when I do stuff like that. Can you talk about that? What your process is for that? Because I mean, especially for the smaller theaters here in San Antonio, like all the shows I've played, I've had it combined, and there's been several times where it's like a full mallet part, but I have to like cut snippets out, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, combining books is so hard. I used to do more of it. I try not to do it very
I know,
often.
me too. I know.
So
Like
much.
like if there's like a really iconic like bongo part in the beginning or whatever, it's like okay, I have to put the bongo part on the drum set. I'm gonna
Yeah.
actually just put my bongos over here, and then some wind chimes or whatever, and mallet runs and stuff like that.
When I was first kind of doing it, I was interested in like learning how to do it. I was trying to make myself, you know, as adaptable as whatever the director needed. Now, part of my attitude is like, man, if you want those parts, you really should hire the percussionist also,
I know.
because it's such a compromise.
Yeah.
That being said, as a freelancer, I'm available to compromise. So um, when I have to combine a book, I sit down with the recording in both books, and almost without exception, there are exceptions, but almost without exception, it's the drum set book first, right? That's the
Yeah.
priority.
Yeah.
Um, there are times when it's not, but generally speaking, the drum set is what has to be there
Yeah.
because the mallet parts are oftentimes doubled elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I'll go through and I'll say, okay, well, what can I, like, can I get those, the outline of that bell thing or whatever on a keyboard or something next to me. I'll just kind of see what I can catch. The accessories, triangle, um, um, things like that aren't so hard to do.
Yeah.
But it's the keyboard or timpani stuff that can be really challenging. But electronics make a huge difference for that.
Can you talk about that? Like, what kind of stuff are you using for that? Because there's just so much out there,
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot. I use the Mallet Cat. I have a two octave, what they call the Mallet Cat Express. Um, and then it has two expanding octaves, which I love this setup. I think it's the most versatile of the electric keyboards out there
Hmm.
because the two octave isn't much bigger than this board. Um, but then you can add the third octave or the fourth octave, or you can do any combination. Like it's not uncommon for me to set up, say, a three octave instrument and then have a single octave somewhere else and use that. Like a lot of times, what I'll do is have one octave as a controller. So like if I hit B, it'll change this into bells, or if I hit B flat, it goes into xylophone or whatever.
Hmm.
Or maybe I have a couple of sound effects. I can put those over there. So I always have a keyboard here.
Yeah.
I use that setup a lot. I do have internal sounds, and I use that sometimes. I use MainStage for a lot of it. I find the programming easier, and obviously you have so many more options with sounds using a computer.
Yeah, and I think the best advice that I could give, and I'm sure Luke, you would actually agree with me on this, is that whatever gear you get, you just got to know it inside and out and be able to do whatever task you are assigned to do. Because the worst thing you can be approached with is like, hey, we need you to actually change this, to this sound and blah blah blah. And if you don't know how to do that on a whim, it's like you can't tell the director, oh, sorry, I have to like reprogram that and whatever. It's like that's
Yeah,
not so great. So like just being able to know your gear, whatever it is, whether it's a mallet station or a mallet cat or uh, a DTX or whatever, be able to just know your stuff. You know what I mean? That's why I feel like the whole technology thing is so important for percussionists to get into as well. Like I feel like a lot of the stuff in front ensemble is like developing that way with marching band where there's a bunch of DTXs and motifs and mallet stations out there, and I feel like it's almost becoming a second instrument, being able to deal with the electronics for percussionists. So could you talk about that, of like, I guess the learning curve, you know what I mean, of
And
the technical side?
for me, the learning curve wasn't too bad because from day one I was using Mainstage. Like, and Mainstage is pretty free,
Affordable.
it was super affordable. It's like $30 and it comes with the sounds. So, and it's reasonably intuitive if you're comfortable on a computer. So I started using Mainstage on. I think the very first show I used a cat. I used the Mainstage because the programming on the cat took more time to learn than it did to learn Mainstage. Um, and I was in a situation where I needed a quick solution. So
Yeah.
Mainstage, once I got it set up, it was pretty reliable and straight up to my programming game on the cat as well. But yeah, I mean, like you said, you got to learn the basics of your instrument, at least the basics, so you can be comfortable with it. Some of these programming things, though, they're so endless. So, like that's kind of one of the common complaints about the mallet cat stuff is that the programming, you can do so much with it, but at the end of the day, it's like how much, like, what's your purpose? Are you using this to be like a soloist playing like, I want to be a band by myself kind of gig? I'm
Yeah.
definitely not. I need it to be like I need it to be a xylophone, and then one bar later I need it to be a marimba, and then on the next note I need it to be timpani. I need it for that. Like that's how I use the instrument.
Oh,
Um, so I learned the programming for doing the splits and doing the different octave shifts and velocity set, all that kind of stuff. I just kind of learned as I need to and use it often enough that I recall it.
for sure. Could you
But I will say,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
really important on that is like anybody getting into it, like it's expensive. I know it's expensive, but you got to make sure that you buy the appropriate stuff because
Yeah.
man, you don't want to show up with like weak cables and be the one that's like causing a sound like to sound bad because you've got terrible cables or you've got the cheapest possible interface and that's causing buzz or
Yeah, there's actually been, I'm not going to say a lot, but there's been a few percussionists that have reached out to me. They're like, "Yeah, I got this musical theater gig, but I don't have the equipment. Like, what do I do?" It's like, "Hey, can I rent from you?" It's like, I mean, yeah, I guess you can. Here's my price list on what I rent or whatever, but like you really should have that gear yourself. Like, don't say yes to the gig if you ain't got the gear.
yeah. I mean, I get that. Say yes to the gig and find the gear. I get that.
I guess, yeah.
But I'm with you, man. Like, if you expect to be a freelance percussionist, you have to somehow get the gear. And like every working freelance percussionist does that. And it sucks because it's a huge amount of money. But I mean,
That's
that,
that's been able to pay you back. I mean, like I took my first hit whenever I first got into the musical theater stuff. It was like, okay, I need to buy a DTX. Like that's just one of the things I gotta buy. And like because there was a bunch of these sound effects that I was like, okay, I can either spend that money on the actual instruments or get something like this that I can use beyond musical theater because I play a lot of gigs with a lot of other types of bands that are not musical theater and more popular music or like rap, hip hop, and they use a lot of sample effects. And so it's like if I can just kill two birds with one stone, get something that I can use for all this stuff, that's great. And then I made the same decision about the mallet station. It's like, okay, I already own a marimba and a vibraphone, but do I really want to spend $3,000 on a xylophone? Maybe, maybe not.
yeah.
I'd rather put that income towards an instrument that maybe I can just use just for this theater stuff. And you have to make mature purchasing decisions of like what's going to help you do the job for the next 10, 15 years. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
invest in the equipment to help you do that. Could you talk about that? Like, what are some of the instruments that you own, and like, why did you purchase them? Like to help you with work and stuff.
So I think when you're buying this stuff, you've got to first look at okay, which ones like I'm not going to start off by buying the 5 octave marimba because there's not a lot of gigs for that. I don't recommend that as being your first purchase.
Yeah.
But it's great to have, but it's not. I since it's so much money, nobody goes out and buys it all at once. So you got to look at okay. I get a lot of drum set calls. I need to make sure I have a drum set. Um, and it sounds really silly to say, but it's very, very helpful to have multiple drum sets.
It is, yes, dude. Talk. I
You,
actually, okay. I remember, I think I heard it from you. You were saying that you have this like configuration of like multiple drums where you can kind of mix and match to do different kits. I think that
Yeah.
was you that said that. Could you talk about that?
For the longest time, I had two kits that were what I was using. One was a kind of a rock kit with bigger sizes, and one was, and it was heavy. It's a good kit, but it's this older Tama kit,
Hmm.
maple shells. But man, it's a tank. It's so heavy, and it was like it didn't even look right for a lot of the jobs I was doing, which
Right.
looks matter. People have perceptions, and you have to deal with that. But so I bought this smaller Mapex kit with a little 18-inch bass drum and learned to tune that in a way that sounded much bigger than an 18-inch drum. Plus, that kit weighs like nothing, so that became my primary kit. I recently upgraded this beautiful Mapex Black Panther Design Lab kit, and I'm so happy with it for a lot of reasons. But what I did was, so I got four toms, right? 10, 12, 14, 16. Um, and I know this sounds totally ridiculous, but I have three bass drums for this kit. There's an
Hmm.
18-inch that's very narrow, it's 12 inches deep, and then a 20 and a 22. Um,
I'm actually
I
working
chose,
towards stealing that idea because I thought I remember I heard that from you and I was like that is so smart because you can just mix and match all these custom combinations and it might seem expensive but in the long run it's actually like it's perfect for a working drummer. Talk about that.
yeah, I mean, I don't, it's very rare that I mean, right now at home, like it's right there, I set it up as a five piece.
Mhm.
But I like almost never play a five piece. It's almost always a four piece. It's almost always it's necessary. And more drums means more hardware, which means more stuff I have to carry. So most of the time, a four piece is what I need. So with this configuration, I can most of the time it's going to be an 18 or 20-inch kick and a 12 and a 14-inch tom. But for some shows, like maybe I want to have a bigger rock sound, I've got the choice of a 22 and could go 22, 12, 16 or whatever. So you've got choices, which we were talking about earlier. You can choose the drums that are going to more match the situation. And the situation isn't only the style, it's also like, what's the venue? Like, yeah, that's great. We're going to play a rock show, but they've got me in this tiny pit next to seven other musicians. And, you know, do they really need a 22-inch kick down there? Maybe not, since it's going to be mic'd anyway.
Hmm.
So you have to choose the situation, the drums that are going to be most appropriate stylistically, but also sonically, um, for and acoustically for everything that you need there. So having these options is really helpful, but it's also helpful because if you're playing music theater gigs, at some point you're going to have your kit set up, and somebody
Yes.
say, "Hey, are you
Yes.
available to do this church gig on Sunday morning?" And you don't want to say no because my drums are over there, and
Hmm.
the sound guy is going to be furious with you if you have to like
Break
take
everything
it
down.
down. He's basically not going to let that happen because then he's going to have somebody has to pay him to come back and set everything back up. So it's just not possible. You got to have multiple kits.
Yeah.
Um, so having this configuration gives me choices, but it also gives me the ability to have two kits in two places at the same time.
Yes, dude. I mean, I already said this, but like that was one bit of advice that I took from you, and then because I was doing this show called First Date, it's like a rock show,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so I had a little. It's one of those Gretsch Catalina kits or whatever, where it's got
yeah,
18-inch
for sure.
bass drum, 12 and 14. I love those kits so much. Those sound great, and they're pretty affordable too. They're only like 500
Yeah,
bucks or something. But
yeah,
I left that one tuned like rock at the theater, and then I was able to take my other. I think it was a Yamaha Bop kit, same sizes, pretty much, just a different brand.
yeah.
I was able to use that one as like my main like jazz kit, and I just at the time I didn't have enough cymbals, so I would just take the cymbals off and then go to the next gig or whatever because I had the hardware already.
Yeah,
But
and that's easy.
that's like super helpful, man, and that's such awesome advice. If there's one bit of advice that you young folks out there listening should take, it's probably that. I mean, we're not saying as soon as you buy your first drum set you have to buy two, but once you start getting up there and start getting more work, and the worst thing that can happen is that you have to say no to a gig because like you don't have the gear, or it's
Right.
somewhere else, like you really should be able to do it all, and that's super cool, man.
Yeah, and then as far as other gear, it's really helpful to have a variety of cymbals. Like I love dark cymbals that are great for playing jazz, and I don't get a lot of calls to play a lot of jazz. So I had these cymbals that are like, oh man, this is great, but it's so inappropriate for a lot of the work that I actually do.
Uh-huh.
So choosing gear that's appropriate for the for the situation, having duplicates of cymbals is helpful for the same reasons we were just talking about. But also with cymbals, especially, it's like
Could you maybe recommend some symbols? Because I mean, there's a lot of young cats that are listening to this that like haven't even started their percussion inventory yet. So if you had to recommend maybe some
I mean,
well-rounded symbols or something.
I I have pretty expensive taste with cymbals. I do play the Sabian Artisans, which are some of the more expensive ones available. Listen, I will say this: you can buy less expensive cymbals, but I am not a fan of buying any of the sheet bronze cymbals. You know, like these. I don't even know all the different.
It's like
You
the
know, what
B8s or whatever.
B8, B8 Pro that Sabian makes. Zildjian makes some.
It's like ZBTs, ZXTs.
Or Gen 16 is that? I don't even keep up with all the names of them, but those like they are what they are. You can't make them sound different, right? Like they sound the way they sound. That's true with higher end cymbals too. Drums, you can buy cheap drums, and with good tuning and good head choice, you can do a lot to improve the sound. But you're not going to make a B8 sound like a B20 cymbal. It's just not going to happen. So you got to spend money on quality gear, and avoid the extremes. Don't go buy the darkest, unlathed, sandblasted cymbal thinking that's going to be versatile cymbal. It's not.
Yeah.
But at the same time, don't go buy like Zildjian used to make these Z series like Mega Bell ride cymbals. It's like, that's great if you're playing like heavy metal, but if for freelance work, you probably need like a good medium weight cymbal that has a reasonable wash to it. So I personally, I'm a huge fan of the Artisan. So I use a 20-inch Artisan medium ride. That's the most versatile ride cymbal I have. Um, I use that one really frequently. Sometimes I need something drier, so I use a Memphis ride, which is from their AAX line. I
Mm.
love the HHX and the HH line as well. The artisan hats are the only hats I've ever played that I've loved. So I use the 13s and the 15s. I use those quite a bit. For crashes, as much as I love the artisans, they're awfully dark. So I find the evolutions to be more friendly. So I use a lot of those.
Very cool. One of the other questions I was wanting to ask you was, can you speak about the challenges and rewards of freelance work?
Yeah, man. For sure. There's a lot of challenges. We've talked a lot about gear. Gear's a huge thing to surmount. Um, so that's an issue for sure. But from a playing standpoint, um, the thing that is the challenge is also one of the things that I like the most. One of the things that I like so much about at least the freelancing that I do is one week I might be playing a bunch of drum set, but then after that it might be several weeks of playing general percussion. And then that might be followed by doing something where it's all electronic. So for me, it's a big variety of settings and situations that I'm playing in. So it's always kind of new. I'm always playing something different, and I like that because it uh, keeps me really engaged. I'm never really bored about what I'm doing.
For
I'm
sure.
very interested in it, so I like that. The challenge of that is trying to maintain timpani chops with drum set chops and two mallet chops and four mallet chops and also vibraphone and then electronic, like trying to maintain all that stuff is at a level that you can really depend on it is a real challenge. And for someone who's not particularly disciplined with practice, it is for me it's a real challenge. So I try to become more disciplined with it.
Mhm.
um, but yeah, that's for me that's the biggest hurdle.
So I feel like, or at least for me, like as I'm getting older, I'm spending less and less time practicing for stuff, and it's like I have to be really concise with like how I organize my time and all this stuff. It's like, okay, if I got to prepare for this, I'm gonna allow myself 30 minutes for warm up, and then within this 1 hour of like really diving in, I'm gonna dive in with these things. And so, do you have like a routine just to kind of keep up with all that, or like what's the importance of that? And
I have an idealized routine that I've never been able to stick with, but it's my lifelong goal. I'll happily share. Um, I have a snare drum routine that I do generally do a pretty good job
Yeah.
of maintaining. Um, it's about 45 minutes to an hour or so of snare drum stuff, and I think that's the most important because
Sure.
that technique. Even though I do a lot of that traditional grip, most of that technique applies and gets used elsewhere. So I think because it's such a foundation, that to me should be 5 or 6 days a week.
Hmm.
So that's my goal on snare drum. The other areas that I play the most often would be drum set, two mallet playing, and then timpani, and then four mallet playing. Four mallet playing being the least often of those. So for me, I try to hit up two mallet technique and sight reading 3 or 4 days a week, drum set 3 or 4 days a week, and timpani. I would like to say that I do 3 or 4
Yeah.
times a week. I don't generally get it in, but that's what my in my ideal I would be doing that. And then four mallet for me is uh, I play four mallet almost every day, but I'm not generally like practicing it. It's
Hmm.
I keep this is my home studio, which is kind of like it's a converted garage, and all my gear is out here with the exception of the marimba. The marimba is in the house, and for me, it's like maybe I feel like playing some Bach after I had some coffee in the morning, or I'm cooking something, so I got 20 minutes to kill. I'll go improvise or sight read or play some Bach. I play a lot of Bach at home. Um, so that's where that comes in. I don't really find myself doing like technical workouts on four mallet playing.
What kind of block are you working on right now, or like what are some of your favorites? Because like that's kind of a staple of like all the teachers that I've studied with. It's like Bach
Yeah,
is
I
like
love the cello suites and the sonatas and partitas for violin as well. So I think somehow in my life I'd like to make it through all of those. I've only ever really studied the second cello suite, which is the D minor, and the first violin sonata. I've done occasional movements of some of the other ones, but I've never done the whole piece.
yeah.
Um, so right now, being at home, I'm just kind of playing those two pieces. I'm kind of relearning them. I haven't played either of them in years. So I'm relearning both of those complete works, and then once I feel like I have it reasonably strong, I'm just going to choose another one and start working on it.
Yeah,
I
my
don't expect.
goal was to do it all in order. So I started with the first cello suite and like
Oh
I
yeah,
played that for my master's recital and I was like, okay, now I'm gonna start learning number two. You know what I mean? Just
yeah,
because I have this or I'm developing this like lifelong relationship with box music. Just from again, it's from my teachers. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah,
a literally our foundation revolves around that. And so
yeah. And it's so rewarding to spend that time with that music. I'm not. I have no interest in like. I'm not putting on Bach recitals or
yeah.
anything. I'm not interested in really doing like marimba recitals.
Mhm.
Occasionally, maybe I'll make a video, but I just like playing it. And
I think playing his music is also. I mean, it's obviously like studying it as well. You're casually studying the music, and it's like okay, and you're gonna find things every time you play it, which is honestly my favorite part. Like I feel like my performances of the first cello suite over the years have just developed and developed and developed because I'm
yeah.
just getting a more mature understanding of the piece, performing it, feeling comfortable with it. You know what I mean?
This is what every other instrumentalist does. Like people don't necessarily learn all the Beethoven sonatas, but they learn the handful that they learn and they spend their life with them. Percussionists don't do that. Like, I know in grad school I played like Merlin or Velocities and that kind of rep. I haven't played it since, you
It's
know.
tough to
So
maintain that, man. Like
extremely tough.
when I played Northern Lights, I was like, it took me an entire year just to get to a somewhat acceptable thing, and it was like, okay, I'm at this peak, and then I graduate, and then I don't own a 5 octave marimba, so I don't practice it, and
Yeah.
it just
And
fizzles
then
away.
as a working guy, you're probably not playing a lot of that kind of music, so it's hard to maintain.
It is, yeah.
So it's an issue, but it's nice to have some repertoire that I keep revisiting, especially as a freelancer, because I'm not gonna play like those kind of heavy pieces. So it's nice to have some kind of music that I keep revisiting over time. Um, I think as an educator, I think that's something that percussionists don't do well. I don't think we look at the successful models of other pedagogy as much as we should. Like if you learn violin, there's if you have a good teacher, you're probably doing some similar things to most other good teachers. You know, like you probably are working on. I'm just guessing here. You're probably doing some technique exercises based around scales and such as part of your like every lesson. You probably have to do something like that. And then I bet you have some sort of technical etudes that you're doing every week. And then you're probably working on a small piece, and then maybe you have one larger piece as well, like a sonata or something.
Hmm.
And that's probably a large model for how a lot of instruction happens. But at least in my experience, a lot of percussion teachers, it's like, all right, so you played Yell After the Rain. I think the
Check.
next thing you want to
Like,
do is this other piece that's 12 times as difficult and 10 minutes longer. And it's like, man, they, they never
yeah,
got fluent. Like
yeah.
they and like what we were talking about with reading, it's the same thing. It's like, all right, so that's how you play that rhythm. Now let's talk about polyrhythms. It's like, I don't know, man. Like they're not fluent in 16th notes. Why are we teaching them, how to play fives? Like that's not particularly useful. Or, these sixth grade books that are teaching 16th notes. That's great, but then they throw in like paradiddles. And it's like paradiddles are useful and we need to learn them. But is that part of the reading? Because most of the time when I'm reading snare drum, I don't play paradiddles
Hmm.
unless it's a rudimental solo. Like I need my students to know the rhythm. Like they
Right.
need mastery at that. So I think we should, as educators, kind of look at what instrumentalists like. What are they doing in their pedagogy that is so successful? I mean, how many amazing young violinists are there in the world? How many amazing, very well accomplished pianists are in the world? And you compare that to percussionists, and it's like we're at a
I
different
feel
point.
like I feel like we as teachers are sort of focusing on the wrong things.
I think so.
You know
I
what
don't,
I
and
mean?
it's not entirely true. Of course, there's a lot of great teaching going on,
Of
and
course. Yeah.
certainly we are at a different point in our development, right? Like we're essentially less than 100 years old compared to several hundred years old. So we definitely are early on in our development. And that's so some of our issues are natural, I think, in our development. Um, but we are at a point in our generation of teachers now where we should be getting some things accomplished, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally understand what you mean. Which sort of ties into my next question, which is, could you talk a little bit about your approach to percussion and maybe what lessons with you look like?
So, like I was saying, it needs to be based on the student. Like at the college, my role at the college is primarily to teach drum set lessons.
Okay.
So the kids come in, and they could be like these. I teach the percussion majors, but I also teach these like the guys who are learning like about recording. Like they're not necessarily percussionists. They're getting like the sound recording program. So sometimes they've had literally no percussion experience. Sometimes they've had maybe a semester of like um, some basic percussion skills. Um, Talk to them about, okay, so like in your case, you're not going to be a gigging drummer. That's not your goal. Your goal is to be working as an engineer, learning how to work with the drums. So I teach them some playing, of course, but then I also try to teach them like how to communicate with a drummer. Like what are the issues, what causes things to sound a certain way. Um, for percussion majors, it's much more like, okay, what are the styles that are most essential that you need to work on? What are the problems in your own playing? We got to get you to a certain point. So a lot of times it's going to be coordination problems. Um, but I also, a big part of my drum set lessons are going to be listening requirements because it's so important, like they need to hear Gad play, like you need to hear, like Vinny is one of my favorite, but like it's not honestly that important that you go listen to Joe's Garage, but you should probably listen to him play Tin Summoner's Tales. Like you should learn his playing. You should learn Jeff Porcaro's playing. Um, so I try to do listening all the time, and recently I've started doing transcriptions with these guys, um, and I do that because it forces them to listen. That's really the
Yeah,
bottom
yeah.
line.
I feel like I definitely hit a wall in my own playing whenever my teacher was like, "All right, transcribe this Max Roach solo." I was like, "Okay," and I'm like, he was playing rhythms that I couldn't identify like really concrete, kind of like what you were saying. Some of the rhythms were like smeared, You know what I mean? So you're trying to like
Yeah.
figure out like what rhythm is that, and
Yeah.
you're trying to filter your hearing. It's tough, man, to do that.
Yeah, it's tough to do. But there, like I had one student this semester. Um, I had him transcribe an old Count Basie tune, and then after that, I was like, "Now I've been telling you for a long time to listen to Kinda Blue, and you still haven't really listened to it. So you're gonna transcribe, so what? Because it's gonna force you to listen to Jimmy Cobb. Because
Rest in peace, Jimmy Cobb. Yeah.
yeah, you should definitely know Jimmy Cobb's playing, and you should know that like Buddy Rich, amazing drummer, of course, but like no one's gonna hire you to sound like that. You need to understand in a combo setting, especially any gig that you're getting anytime soon, it's not gonna be about you. You need to learn how to be part of the group and understand groove in that context.
Make those quarter notes swing.
Yeah, it's so important. And yeah, so you got to learn the style. Like you're not gonna start off being Tony Williams. Like
Yeah, I have
good.
a long way to go to get there.
I
I'm
bet
on
I have further. Yeah.
one of the next questions I was going to ask, just to kind of leading into wrapping up here, was where do you think percussion is going? Like in terms of like post
Ooh.
COVID and like dealing with, because one of my friends who is a upcoming a composer, he was saying that he feels that a lot of solo music is going to come out of this, to where there's going to just be more maybe percussion and like electronics or something, just to kind of to adapt for us maybe not being able to be in perform in different ensembles and stuff. So like, what are your thoughts about that? And I guess
Oh,
percussion,
you mean
you, I
they
guess,
related to COVID or like long term?
long term, I guess, or just, yeah, like it doesn't even have to be with COVID. Just like, I guess in general, where do you think percussion's going?
I mean, with COVID, it's hard to say how this will affect us long term. Because I think things will eventually return to somewhat of a normal setting.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure that there are people doing all sorts of creative things right now. I mean, I know people are writing pieces and coming up with, you know, solutions for now. I don't know if these solutions are how they're going to approach their career after that. Like there was all those videos of people playing like mixing bowls and stuff. I don't know if they're going to be doing a lot of that post COVID or not. Um, but I think chamber music wise, percussion has been. I think that's been the most interesting thing in the percussion world for the past 20 or 30 years is how percussion has worked as a chamber unit. Like the guys from um, when I think of percussion, I don't even think of them as like a percussion ensemble. I think of them as like a new music ensemble. Like they've transcended the percussion world, I feel like,
Which is
and
amazing.
they've done some great work. And there's some other groups that have done some really great work. And now there's so many of these independent percussion chamber groups that you guys have. The 3G group is awesome. Line Upon Line, some of these other groups, Third Coast has been around for a while. All these great groups that are doing, somewhat similar things. It's great. We're having this great time in chamber music.
And there's
Um,
like more of that, which is great. I feel like just from being in it myself, like this stuff that's happening with Soci and like the camps that they're putting together, that's just kind of breeding the next generation of like, hey, we can't be the only like percussion quartet out here. There needs to be a next. We need to educate the next generation, and I feel like that's becoming like really like a really positive thing, and hopefully there's going to be more stuff like that in the
and
future.
hopefully we'll see more and more mixed group. That's for percussion to continue to grow. It needs to be more with other people, right? Instead of only this. If we only are isolated in our only percussion groups,
Yeah.
then that can our development. It's been really cool, and we should keep doing that because it's
Cause you're
certainly
actually
has
doing that with your
shown.
group, right? Like you're doing percussion and with George, right? Talk about that.
George Heathcote and I used to do this percussion and electric guitar kind of new music duo. We would oftentimes bring in other players. We've kind of let that project fizzle as we both were busy. I guess we could revisit it now because I don't know that either one of us are that busy. But we did let that project kind of fizzle. But that was we would do things like marimba and electric guitar, which works so much better than people realize. And we would play like some John Cage music that was not composed for that duo, but we would figure out ways to do that. We would commission people to write for us, and we found ways to do mixed chamber music, which I think is on the classical side the most interesting thing. I really am drawn to mixed chamber music. Um, Probably hearing some of David Lang's work was what really turned me on to that. Of course, Steve Reich's stuff is incredible. Um, so a lot of that stuff really, I think, is where things are going. The idea of soloist, I don't know. I don't know. Percussion as a recital piece.
It's tough
I
to
don't know.
sell. It's tough to sell, and it's I honestly would agree with you about having percussion, branch away from just this percussion playing with percussion. Because right now I've got a piano and vibraphone duo with a buddy of mine, just inspired by Gary Burton and Chick Corea. But like we're not just gonna play jazz. We're
Yeah.
gonna do the jazz thing as a tribute to them, but a majority of the stuff we're playing is more like contemporary stuff, and I think that's a beautiful sound, vibraphone and grand
Oh
piano.
yeah. All those Gary Burton and Chick things are the Makoto and Burton stuff. Man, yeah, you got to keep me posted on how that develops. I'd love to hear that.
We're like right now we're working on well, I think it was the pianist that brought it, where it was like a collection of three movements, and I think it's a full piano piece, but we're just arranging it for piano
Yeah.
and for
Yeah,
vibes, and
'cause
we're also doing some, I think
Gary and
using.
Chick did like the Bartok stuff. Yeah, on that Native Synths album, I know he did a few Bartok pieces.
I'm excited about that just because I actually own the vibraphone now, and we're able to do that. And he's got his own piano, and so that's part of the gear thing as well. Is projects will go much faster like once you actually own the instruments. But my
Oh yeah,
last question, or sorry, go ahead.
chamber music. Like if you're gonna do a percussion quartet, when George and I had that thing, young players would oftentimes say like, "Hey man, we're thinking about starting a percussion ensemble. What do you think?" And I always want to be really supportive. I think it's great. I think you guys should totally do that. But like,
How much is it going to
you know,
cost?
what are you going to program? And then they'll say, well, we're looking at this piece and this piece. It's like, man, like that's awesome. I've been guilty of it too. I know. I wanted to do this incredible piece by George Crumb. He wrote all these these songbooks
Hmm.
very late in his career. Um, and I really wanted to do all these have are percussion quartets plus piano and voice. I think that's the and he wrote like several books of these, right? And a few of my friends and I were really looking seriously into doing it. And George Crumb, you don't want to compromise on any of his instrument choices.
Yeah,
And you look at the list and you're like, man, there's just no way. You need
like
like a
racks of
track to
bongs and all this stuff. Yeah,
yeah. Let's say you can find the gear. Where are you going to rehearse it, and then how are you going to get it to and from the space? Like, it's just not. It's not as feasible as you would maybe like it to be. So gear's a real problem for that, for sure.
definitely. Like one of the last questions I was going to ask you was, what's next for you? Obviously post COVID and all this other stuff. So like, what are your immediate plans after this, and what where can we find more
I was
information about what you're doing?
I I was in a real sweet spot pre-COVID, and I'm hoping to get back to that. I had this really nice balance of teaching a fair number of private students, but not so many. When I was younger, I would teach like 60 or 70 students a week, and it's good for the income and it's very rewarding, but it's also very draining. That's a lot of one-on-one lessons and a lot of driving time and all this. It's very draining. Um, so I got to a point where I was relying only on performing and teaching, and it was a nice balance of that. I think I was doing probably, I'm just going to guess, 65% of my income was probably performing, where the other 35% would have been through teaching. And I really enjoy that balance because I like teaching, but if it's all I do, then I get, it starts to,
Get burned out, yeah.
yeah. Um, so I like that balance. I really hope to get back to that. I like, I really enjoy teaching at the college level. Um, of course, getting a DMA, that was kind of the goal. But I have a family and we really love our home and we're not interested in moving around the country multiple times trying to get one job and then trying to find a better job. I'm not really looking for that. I'm not looking for the perfect job or really even the perfect career. I'm personally looking for something that is going to allow me to do the things I want to do creatively and still leave space for what I want to do with my family life, which is so important, and be able to have that balance. So I I was kind of doing that. I really just hope to get back to that and maintain that.
Dude, that's
Maybe.
actually like a really powerful statement in itself because that's something that everyone kind of has to figure out. It's like, are you going to go to the job, or are you going to be one of those people that's, or I don't know. I hate to like reference Dreamgirls again, but there was this quote in Dreamgirls that I just remember, and then one of the actors he said the best will survive no matter where they're put. And I remember when he said that in the show, I was like, man, I really like that because it's true. It's like if you work your butt off and if you're just like really good at what you do or just try to be the absolute best, then like I feel like you can find work, wherever you want to
Yeah,
live. You know what I mean?
true. I mean, of course, in music, our work relies on so many things that are outside of our control.
Right.
Um, but honestly, when I stopped applying for college jobs, one of the things this one of the things that I started thinking was I don't need to be the best. I don't need to be the best marimbist. I don't need to be the best drum set player. I need to be good, obviously, right? I need to be reliable as a musician and hopefully creative enough that people want what I have to offer on these. But there's something kind of powerful about letting go of this idea that you're going to be the best.
Hmm.
Because, I mean, I'm never going to be the best. I know so many players, even locally, that can do so much on certain instruments that I can't do. Um, I stopped trying to be the best or stop seeking. Like I know people who are constantly looking for the better job, even though they have good jobs, and it's like that's fine. There's no judgment for me, but for me, what I wanted was like I want to be able to do the things that I want to do in life. And a big part of that for me is my family and home life. But I also want to be able to play music. I don't, it'd be great to be playing a higher paying situation, but I also get to play a lot. So
Yeah.
that's,
Finding that balance, you know what I mean? Because it's like for me, it's like one of my things was I like here's priority number one. I want to live in Texas. Priority number two, I would like to live in between Austin, San Antonio, and Houston somewhere. You know what I
yeah,
mean? That was number two, and it was like three. It's like I'm gonna apply for every job that opens within this place and see what sticks. You know what I mean? And go from there. But it's like you gotta just
yeah,
filter your life answers down to like what's important to you as a musician. Because I know there are a lot of folks that we know that are like, I don't care if I have to leave Texas, I'm going where the job's going, and that's fantastic. Like I applaud people like that, but part of
sure,
part
it's great.
part of what
But
makes
you also
yeah, go ahead.
limitations of those jobs, like I by the time I got my DMA, I was older. I already had my family. So the idea of like moving to like Abilene for less money than I was making here with fewer prospects for playing wasn't particularly attractive.
Mhm.
Um, or moving around the country like that. So I stopped applying pretty early in the game, honestly, um, because for me, that's not what I needed to be success. Like it
Right.
wasn't like my life's goal to be a college professor. It is for a lot of people. They really want that and need it. And man, that's a great job for sure. It's a really good job, and there's a lot of great players that have taken those positions and done some really wonderful work. Um, but I think it's important as a musician if you can think really hard about what it is that's going to meet, like how are you going to define success in your life? And I think it's very dangerous if you define success based on the job.
Yeah.
Like if it's, I need to have tenure somewhere to be successful. Man, there's not that many people who get to have that. So
Yeah. Because it's a numbers game at that point.
it is a numbers game. Or, I same can be said about like getting a full-time job with an orchestra. What a great job, man! What an amazing job if you're able to secure, you know, a spot with full-time, like say Houston Symphony or Chicago or New York or something. Amazing, sure, amazing. But there's not that many people that get to have that job. So I I really tell people not to depend on that as what you need to be successful.
For sure. Well, Luke, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today, and I feel like our listeners are going to have a huge amount of stuff to be able to take away from this conversation. So I'll do my best to have this episode up on Spotify pretty soon and also up on YouTube. But just want to again thank you for your time, and I'll see you later.
All right, man. Good to see you.
Thank you. Take care.